Let's talk about jQuery. So jQuery addresses a very important problem that occurred when folks got into this war of browsers, right? We had many vendors, Microsoft and Apple and Google, starting to get in front of you, right? And try to get to be the window into the rest of the internet, right? To be the one browser that allowed you to have access to the rest of the world. So this war between these folks, generated a fragmentation of the JavaScript language, right? Each one was trying to outdo the other, adding new features beyond what the spec was providing, and also the folks were late to update to the latest version of whatever browser they were using. Yes, so it's very common that a large population would have all sorts of different versions of JavaScript, different version of different vendors, and for our developers, us from that were building these things, it was very hard to try and target all these different versions, all these different vendors, right? It just became a nightmare for maintenance purposes, right? We started creating ourselves libraries that would encapsulate the differences between the browsers, right? It used to be that you had all these really long switch statements, yeah, that compared. It says, well, what are you running? What vendor are you using? And once you determine the vendor, well, which version of that vendor are you using, right? And depending on that combination that was becoming more and more complex, we would behave one way or we would behave another way, right? So maintaining this exponential explosion of different combinations became very hard. So jQuery, sought to fix this or to provide a solution to this, right? So what they did is it says, okay, all you folks are trying to deal with this issue, independently, and you're creating all your own libraries to deal with this, right? So jQuery says, well, I'll encapsulate all the best practices of what everybody has been doing in the industry on how to deal with this issue, and I'll provide a layer of abstraction, right? So that when so instead of you having to do it yourself, I'll do that, right? I'll encapsulate all that. So instead of you writing to the specific version, specific vendor, you'll just have one function that you have to call. Once you call that function, I will do the switch statements and check to see which vendor and which version, right? And I'll do the right thing, right? And I'll fully document it. I'll tell you exactly how it behaves, and you no longer have to deal with all the complexity of having to deal with different vendors, different versions. Make sense, right? And this was a huge boom, right, to developers, and especially having to maintain a growing number of JavaScript files, right? That were growing complexity. This was when the .com right before the .com boost, or maybe a little later, where applications were becoming more and more complex on the client side, right? We're no longer was just form validation and just small little animations. Right now, we were building enterprise applications on the browser, so we're getting applications were getting fairly complex on the client side. Yes, we needed a means to write fully scalable, fully maintainable applications, right? And not have to deal with all this minutia of the different vendors. Make sense? So jQuery dealt with that huge problem. To bring jQuery into your page, it's fairly simple. You can either download the JavaScript file into your local machine, or you can point to the CDN. Again, this is the preferred way, is to point to the CDN when you're going into production. But locally, for development purposes, it's a good idea to have a local copy of the file locally in your machine. Also notice the min in the name. That typically means that the file has gone through a minimization transformation, meaning that all it has been encapsulated, it has been compressed as much as possible, again, to minimize the size of the file and to minimize the time it takes the browser to download the file. Yes, right? Which, if you go with the CDN, it won't be an issue, because chances are that by the time they get to your not yet famous file, not yet famous website, usually they've probably already gone through Facebook and Twitter, and they've gone to these other websites, much more famous than yours, and they have probably already downloaded that jQuery version. So by the time they get to you, they already have that file, and the browser's not going to bother downloading it. Yes, again, make sense? So the CDN here, it doesn't fit. Why doesn't this fit? It's way down there. Fine, we'll find it ourselves. Once you download jQuery and you make it available, the jQuery provides a single global function, something that we tell you not to do, to declare global functions, declare global variables. jQuery goes ahead and does it. That's fine. When you become as famous as jQuery, then go ahead, declare your global variables, and then we'll be happy to use your your global variables too. So it declares this global function, called jQuery, J capital Q query, and the syntax is as follows. It's a very powerful function. It takes a selector. It's a selector. Selector is written in CSS syntax. You know, just like you would write in CSS that you refer to pieces of document in the HTML documents. That's what would go there commonly. That's what normally would go there. We'll see that we can put a whole bunch of other things in there too. But the most common thing is that you put a CSS string. Okay, so if you put in quotes, you say P or H1, right? Then that means that you are referring to all elements, all paragraphs, or all heading ones, or something like that. Make sense? Okay. Also, notice that the name query comes from the fact that you can query the document, just like you can query a database with a select statement. Yes, and you're querying a database. Here, you're querying the DOM, right? As if it were a data set. It says, okay, well, give me all the H1s, give me all the paragraphs, find for me all of these. Now that I have it, now that I have all the paragraphs, now that I have all the H1s, okay, I can now apply an action. Right? I can remove them. I can style them. I can invoke click on them. I can set an event handler on them. So actions, there's a whole library of actions. We're only going to skim the surface here, okay? And then they, depending on the action, you have parameters depending on the actions. Make sense? Right. So that's it. Now, since a good developer is a lazy developer, six characters, and one of them is a capital character. It's too long. So we have an alias for jQuery. It's $. So $sign is an alias of jQuery. Right? So you'll see lots of $signs everywhere. Yes, but basically it's the same thing. It's a function, right, that takes a selector and whatnot. Everybody okay? Yeah. All right. So let's look at some really simple examples. You can say jQuery, grab me all the paragraphs, transform their CSS color. I want it to be red. That means that if you have paragraphs, any number of paragraphs, this will grab all the paragraphs and will transform their foreground color to be red. All of them. Right? Since you didn't specify which one, it'll do all of them, which is pretty cool, right? It can transform an entire set of elements. Here's another one. Here's it says $sign. Say, hey jQuery, dot details. Meaning in CSS, I'm grabbing all the elements who have a class dot details on them. Yes, right. And dot hide does what you would expect. It just hides it. Doesn't show it anymore in the DOM. It's still in the DOM. It's just not visible. Yes. Or we can change the style. We can manipulate different portions of the DOM, or we can also read from elements that are already on the DOM. We can say, hey, grab me the element whose ID is name, right, and read the value. So presumably this is an input field. It could be a text area. It could be a dropdown. It could be any input in any form element. You can read the value and then store it in a local variable name. Yes. Okay. Again, these are all jQuery. It's the jQuery API, right? So it's how you do it in jQuery, much more concise. Here, if you use a straight JavaScript, you would have to say what? Document dot get element by ID, right? Dot inner value or something or other, right? So this is much more verbose for the same exact thing. Also, in different browsers, you would have different syntax. Yes, different versions might have different syntax. You don't have to deal with any of that. .val handles all that. It says, hey, what vendor are you using? What version? Oh, I'll do the right thing. I know what you mean. You want the value of this input field. Make sense? Yes. Yeah, actually it'll return an array of all the elements. Yep. Just like P here, right? It'll return this up to here. It'll return an array of all the elements that met that criteria, and then the .css is smart enough to know what to do. If it's just one, if it's an array, it'll iterate over all of them, right, and do the transformation. An array of one element. Yep. 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 Awesome. Also, one thing that we need to consider is that when a document is being read, the HTML, right, gets downloaded from the server, the browser starts parsing that HTML. Yes, and as it's parsing the ASCII file, it's building the DOM, right? It's building the document object. Yes, it's not done until it hits that last body in the HTML. Right? Up until that point, it has not completely finished building the DOM. So it could be that we might not be ready to manipulate the DOM until it has fully loaded, until it has been fully parsed and interpreted by the browser. So jQuery allows you to ask or to be notified, hey, is the document ready? Right? Can I start manipulating it? Can I start touching it? Right? It could be that it's still too early. So what jQuery allows you to do is to declare an event handler that says, "Hey, document, tell me when you're ready." Right? Once you have been parsed, notify me. Once you notify me, call the following function. And once the function is called, by this time now we are guaranteed that the whole DOM has been loaded, the browser has already interpreted, it has been completely rendered on the screen, and now I can start manipulating it. Make sense? If you're too early, it could be that you're referring to something on the page that is not yet there, right? Hasn't yet made it to the DOM. It's too early and it fails. So a couple of syntax things here. Notice this function here. This function, and notice that it doesn't have a name, right? It's an anonymous function. It's a function that is meant to be used once and then thrown away. It's like a lambda, right? If you're using Java or other languages, right? It's a lambda function that it's not meant to be invoked anywhere else, but in this context. Right? In other languages, it's not as important. Here is oftentimes crucial. This feature of using anonymous functions, especially because, again, as I mentioned earlier, in JavaScript we don't have namespaces. Well, at least in pre-ES6, we didn't have namespaces, right? So we always used to economize on naming things, right? So if I name the function, I might be, is that name function already taken? Am I going to be overriding somebody else's function? It says, okay, so it was very common in the culture to use lambda functions so that we economize on the names of functions and variables. Yes.
And so will that function execute then right after it's defined?
Yeah, exactly. Right. What it does is that it declares an onload attribute on the body, and the body calls whatever function with this function, right? It says, I'm calling you. It says, I'm done. The body has been entirely loaded and parsed. Yep. A more concise version of this is this syntax is $, and just the function. These do exactly the same thing, but you still see this sometimes in industry. So if you just so you have seen at least once, or oftentimes, if we declare an init function or a main function, right? We can either declare the init function elsewhere and then just call $init, and it calls the init function, and then you embed all your code in here, right? In the assignment, I believe I call it main, right? So it would be $main, and it would call your main function once the entire document has been loaded, and then in there you can start manipulating your content. Yes. Click events. We can use the .click function to either bind a click event on any element, not just buttons and links, and on any element. So I want to know when you clicked on this paragraph or on this header, right? Or when you hovered your mouse over that header, I want to be notified. Yes. So the way it works is that you can either programmatically simulate a click, or you can be notified if somebody clicked on it, right? jQuery functions typically has to have two versions, right? A write version where you can write to or generate content, right? And a read function, a read version of the same function that allows you to receive data, either generate the data or receive data. Notice that it's the same function. It looks like it's overloaded, but there's no such thing. There's no overloading in JavaScript, right? It's actually the same exact function, but the function is smart enough to know. It says, Will, did you pass me an argument or not? If you didn't pass me an argument, then you meant to generate an event. If you did pass me an argument, then you meant to bind a function on the on click, right? And so this function can do either one. I can simulate a click, or I can be notified, right? If somebody clicked the paragraph, then I would put the action here. Yes. And again, it's an anonymous function. So here's just a really quick example. We have H1 with an ID of hide me, an ID here we have hide me 2 with a hide me timed. Down below we have a click to hide and a click to hide time. So two buttons. So presumably, if you click on this first button, it'll click it will hide the hide me. Whereas if you click on the second one, it will have a timer, presumably, right? And here's the implementation. I'm grabbing the button, right? The button that's called click to hide. There it is, click to hide. I'm grabbing it. I'm binding a click function. I'm binding an event handler so that if somebody clicks on it, it'll call this function inside. And what the function will do? It'll grab the hide me, which is this first one, and then say .hide, and it'll just hide it from view. Pretty simple. Everybody okay? Yes. Or down here, the hide function. The only difference between these two is that the hide function can take an argument on a timer. It says, when do you want me to do this? You want me to do it now, or do you want me to wait? Right. Plus, it takes a whole bunch of other arguments. It can animate it. Maybe it can fade it out. Right. It can bump it. And leave it, or maybe go, move left, move right. There's a whole bunch of animations that you can add to jQuery. We're not going to look at those, but yeah, I mean, they're some of them are pretty fun. Hide me, the just straight hide, it's just poof, it's gone. Right? It just hides it normally. Here's a couple other event handlers other than click. You have click, you have double click, you have drag, you have mouse enter, mouse leave. There's all sorts of event handlers. Here's a couple more. You have mouse enter, right? So here's an H1 with an enter. It says, hey enter, if the mouse is over you, call this function and alert entered. And if you leave, then alert you left H1. A toggle. Here you have a button called toggle, and the ID also called toggle. And when you click on the toggle button, what we're going to do is that we're going to grab that toggle ID, and we're going to say .toggle. .toggle, what it does is that it first calls hide, and then it calls show, and then it calls hide, and then it calls show. So it remembers whether it was hit it calls the opposite. So .toggle can very quickly, it's a combination of hide and show. So we've been looking at hide. Just like there's a hide, there's a show. A show undoes a hide, right? It's the opposite. Mouse down. There's a whole bunch of these event handlers. There's Animate. Animate allows you to take an element and and provide two starting points and say, hey, the property, it allows you to interpolate between properties, right? So if the property was a color red and another property was color blue, it allows you to interpolate between those two properties, right? And it says, hey, interpolate the foreground color, or interpolate the background color, or interpolate the top position or bottom position or left position or whatever, right? And you can say, grab me when you click on the button left here. Okay, I'm gonna call this function. So it means grab the animate element here. Oh, this should be a hashtag here. Sorry, hash animate, an idea animate, this one, and animate left 250 and animate right 250, right? And what it'll do is that it will change, it will interpolate between those two positions. You can, I think the default time between the position is 1 second, but you can say 5 seconds. You can say, how many seconds do you want between the interpolations. So you'll see the H1 here animate me, scroll through the window, right, from one side and then move from the left and from the right, between these two positions. Callbacks. Callback is a very important aspect of JavaScript in general. They allow you to declare a function that will be invoked somewhere in the future, right? And allows you to be notified when certain events happen. Either because you're animating and you want to know when the animation stopped, when it's done, so you can maybe go on to the next one and maybe implement a very simple finite state machine. For us, it'll be very, very crucial for doing inter-process communication, right? It will happen that the page won't have any data to render, right? It will always have to go out to the server for data, yes? And the communication between the browser and the server will be asynchronous, right? It'll generate an HTTP request, right? And says, hey, get me some data. And that communication oftentimes is asynchronous, right? So the only way to deal with that is for the browser to say, hey, browser, JavaScript to tell the browser, hey, browser, go fetch me this data. I don't want to wait for it because I have a whole bunch of other things to do. I need to animate this little cat over here. So notify me when the data comes back from the server, right? And the way you're going to notify me is through this callback, okay? And once the data comes back from the server, notify me. Here are my users. Now I can render them on the screen. Make sense? Right? So callbacks is a very common thing here. In this particular case, this function right here is a callback function that gets invoked, 3 seconds after this paragraph gets hidden. Okay, and then notifies us, hey, I'm done. So anything that has to do with time, right, either with the future or near future, right, callbacks is going to be a very crucial thing to do. Other things here, chaining in JavaScript in general, but in jQuery in particular. When you grab an element like this, grab me this particular element. You can do all sorts of jQuery transformations. Like I can change CSS, I can do a click, I can do all sorts of things, right? It's very common in JavaScript that these functions are written in such a way, right? These functions are written in such a way that what they return, their return is the original object. Now they were transforming, right? So what's the original object? The original object is this, chaining example ID, right? That's the object that we are operating on. Yes, right. So that object, what are we doing here? We're transforming its foreground color. Yes. So that function is going to return the original object. Since it returns the original object, we can do another transformation on it. See that? Right? And then we can chain together all sorts of transformations one after another. It's very common in JavaScript in general, but in jQuery is very common. All the functions in jQuery support this behavior, right? That all functions return the original object that you were operating on, so you can chain together all sorts of transformations. Let's see, what else? You can, some other transformations are very, very common. Being able to change the text of an element, or change the HTML content. So for instance, this H1, I can change the text here. Or if that element contains an entire HTML, I can put HTML, or I can manipulate the text in there. So there it is. So I'm retrieving the hello. I'm changing it to hello world. It used to say text example, now it says hello world. So here's a really, really simple to-do list, but now implemented using jQuery. We implemented it using JavaScript. Let's see if we have time to do it using jQuery. So let's see. Where is it? I think it's this one. No, that's not it. Where did my code go? Okay, there we go. So we created a to-do using JavaScript. Instead, let's now create another one, and we'll call it a new file and save it as a to-do, but we'll say jQuery .html, and we'll have a separate file and save it, and this will be to-do, to-do jQuery, but the JavaScript side of this. All right, excellent. So let's look at this, and let's create the same text from the previous example. Let's see. So the HTML. There we go. So we're going to paste it in here. The same input field, the same text area, but the JavaScript. Instead of using JavaScript, we're going to use jQuery. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. So in jQuery, we're going to grab this. We're going to select that, grab it here. Oops. And so in the to-do jQuery, we forgot to put the function, right? So we don't want to litter the namespace, so we're going to put everything into this immediately invoked function expression. And in here, we're going to declare a couple of variables. Notice I'm following the same. Oh, this can't be sortable. We have the title, the description, the add button, the to-do. We're declaring presumably an event handler, add a button handler, which we don't have just yet. Let's see. We never loaded jQuery, did we? So let's grab that from the second homework. I think we have it here. We need to grab jQuery, obviously. Let's do that right here. So I'm going to grab, let's see, Bootstrap. We don't need Bootstrap. Font awesome. We do need jQuery. So I'm going to grab jQuery right here. Grab that, copy. And I'll add it to my HTML. Oops. There it is. Grab jQuery. And let's see if we can navigate to it. Our to-do. We don't have an event handler just yet. Just to verify that jQuery indeed is loaded, let's navigate to it. So let's make a link to it. So to-do jQuery. So to-do jQuery. Oops. Let's go back. Refresh. Here's to-do jQuery. Okay, there we go. So that's our version, our jQuery version of that. Just to see that this worked, let's do let's use our a listener that can say, hey, call the init function here once it's loaded, and our init function init is going to tell us alert hello from jQuery. Okay. All right, so I'm going to refresh this, and indeed it says hello from jQuery. So jQuery was notified that the document was loaded, and jQuery says, yep, the document is ready to be manipulated. Okay. Once we've done that, let's see, what can we do? We can declare all these variables. Let's put it up here. Notice that here it's a little bit too early to grab the title because the document might have not been loaded just yet, right? Only in here in this init am I guaranteed that the document has loaded. My input fields have been loaded. My DOM is ready, and so I can read all this. I can read all this. I can say grab the title from the DOM. So this is a little bit too early. This is a little bit too early. Same thing with the description. Same thing with the button. Only in here am I guaranteed that the content has already loaded in this init. All right, so just removing this. There we go. All right, so init has it. What else do we need? We need an event handler. We can declare this right here. We say we're going to have a function who's going to be notified when the button is clicked, the add button, right? So here we're just going to say alert button clicked, just to see that this worked, right? So let's refresh over here. We click on the button. It says, yep, the button was clicked, right? So we do have that hooked up. We can start grabbing the title field. And I think I've done that already. So let me copy that. Where are you? Add button. There we go. So we're grabbing the title. We're grabbing the description. We're getting the time. Just what we did exactly in the previous example, but using jQuery instead. So let me replace that. And let's go over it real quick. We're saying grab the value of the title field val, the description, grab the time here, and grab the li. All right, notice this notation here where jQuery, right, can generate HTML, but using a different syntax, right? We say jQuery generate for me a brand new HTML node span. Right, this is different, right? Because what we saw is jQuery, you can pass in CSS, right? Here we're not passing CSS. We're passing fully qualified HTML content to jQuery. So instead of grabbing elements that are already in the page, this is generating a brand new node, HTML node, that is ready to be added to the DOM. This died.